This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. I hope you're feeling good. I'm all right. I'm a little worn down. My brain is definitely flashing the low battery sign right now. I just got back from LA a couple days ago. I was out there for the better part of a week. I did so many podcasts with so many awesome people that you're going to hear in the next couple months. Man, I can't wait for you to hear some of these. But yeah, I think I did like 8 podcasts in 5 days, something like that. It was really good, but man, it's a little much. My brain is pretty much done. But before that, before I was in LA, I was sitting down with this week's guest. Man, I'm so happy we got him on the show. I've got Tiga on the podcast. It was an honor to have him on. I mean, he's one of those people where if he didn't exist, I think the landscape of dance music in the modern era would just look different. And he's actually running a podcast of his own, which is really, really good. Highly recommended. It's called The Last Party on Earth. He just put out the first season of it. He's talking to a different guest each episode. He's got people like Carl Cox, Seth Troxler, Annie Mac, and these are people he's known for a long time. It's exactly the kind of conversation I love. It's really the same reason I started doing this show years ago. If you like this, you would love The Last Party on Earth, so go find that. It's out everywhere that podcasts are available. We're going to put a link in the description of this episode where you can go check it out as well. Tiga's always on tour. Tiga's always dropping new music. His legendary label, Turbo Records, is always putting out really interesting, fresh sounds. So make sure to keep up with everything he's doing. And I'll tell you a little more about how we met up in just a minute. Back to Back is brought to you today by my friends over at Serato. You've heard me talk about Serato before. You already know. They've been supporting DJs and producers for over a decade. I use their products all the time. And the one I'm talking about today, it's Serato Studio. Serato Studio is a brand new beat-making tool. So if you've been feeling a little stagnant lately, been hitting some writer's block, and just want to freshen up your workflow, I'd really recommend checking this out. You can use it in conjunction with any DAW that you're already using. And basically, Serato Studio, the intention when they made it was just to simplify the path to creativity, to remove kind of all just the little bumps in the road, the little annoyances that get in the way of just getting your idea out of your head and into the software. And it comes built in with tons of loops and effects and samples. They've got their pitch and time, their proprietary algorithm that allows you to just throw any sample in there and immediately get it sounding crispy, sitting where you want. And they've gotten some amazing artists to make sample packs for Serato Studio. People like Flostradamus, the good folks over at Fool's Gold Records, legendary hip-hop producer Just Blaze. And I've got a special deal just for listeners of this show. Right now, if you go to www.serato.com/studio, download Serato Studio, and when you're signing up for a subscription, use the code WillyJoy2. That's WillyJoy and the number 2 at checkout to get 2 free months of Serato Studio. That's a great deal. You're not going to find it anywhere else. So go there right now, www.serato.com/studio, and use promo code WillyJoy2, that's WillyJoy and then the number 2, to get 2 free months of Serato Studio. So look, Tiga's on the show. Anytime someone's had such a long career with so many different benchmarks, it's hard to know kind of where to even dive in. It's hard to know what you want to focus on. But I think we did pretty good. We talked about a lot, from the early days of throwing some of the first raves ever in Montreal, maybe the first rave, all the way up into, 20 plus years of Turbo Records, an incredible, legendary record label that really was there at the start of the careers of a lot of important artists. Not to mention his own career, which has given us a bunch of really classic songs. Classics like Bugatti that you've heard everywhere, Mind Dimension, which still gets sampled to this day. I actually forgot to ask him about Mind Dimension. That's my one regret in this because I love that song so much. But look, I'm happy with it. It's refreshing to talk to somebody else who hosts their own podcast because, you know, we were just on the same page. You kind of know the deal. You know the format. We were throwing stuff back and forth, having fun with it. At the risk of sounding arrogant, I think this is one that kind of everybody should hear. And in that spirit, I'm going to ask you for a favor right now. Help me spread the word not only about this amazing episode with Tiga, but just in general. If you've listened to the show before, you know word of mouth is by far the biggest way that we grow. So I want to see everybody out there tag us in your stories. Put up a tweet. Just tell a friend who loves music as much as you do. Let them know you're listening and that they should check it out too. My name is @WillyJoy on all social media, and the show is @BackToBackPod. And that's all spelled out like back, T-O, back pod. A bunch of times this week, people started using the numeral 2, and that just tags a basketball podcast, and I think they're starting to get real sick of me. So it's all spelled out BackToBackPod. And look, I see everybody out there who's tagging us, who's letting people know they should be tuning into the show. I'm always going to be chatting with everybody out there. I'm always going to be reposting your content. We're very community-minded here at Back to Back. You can always reach out to me at backtobackpod@gmail.com. All your thoughts, your questions about the show, your concerns, something you might be going through in your life, professionally, personally, whatever it is, we can talk about it. But for right now, let's get into this one. I hope you enjoy it. I loved it. Let's do it. This is me and Tiga, back to back. Let's go. Doing research for this interview, I found out that not only do you have a podcast, Last Party on Earth, you did a podcast like 10 years ago?
Yeah, I did actually. Yeah, I also kind of forgot about that one. Yeah, I did one called My Name is Tiga a long time ago, I guess, when I should have stuck with that because I was ahead of the curve on that one.
You were really ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and we were doing them. And they were really well put together too. I remember I used to rent studios at the big Radio Canada, like the CBC Canadian radio studios, which is like very kind of old-fashioned, classic, big radio studios. You know, all wood, amazing acoustics.
And that's where you did podcasts.
And that's where I was recording these podcasts. I mean, I guess I think it was my younger brother who, a lot of the time, he's the one who gets me going on new technologies. He'll be like, this would be good. But I remember, I think he was the one who mentioned, for me, I had a history in radio. Like I did a lot of radio when I was young. So I always just thought of it like a radio show.
Right.
And it was just, you know, disseminated as a podcast.
Did you sort of just look at it as, you know, this is a new medium, which podcasting was new, I think we forget, not that long ago.
Yeah.
Was it just sort of a natural evolution to you?
I just thought of it like a radio show. It was being broadcast in a different way, but I don't think I really even thought about the broadcast side of it so much. Now with the newer podcast with Last Party on Earth, which I started last year, then it was a little bit more like, okay, this, you know, podcast can reach so many people. I'm also now, I really enjoy listening to other podcasts. So
what kind of podcasts do you listen to?
The ones I listen to pretty religiously. I mean, I've gone in and out of favor with some. I used to really love the Alec Baldwin one.
Oh, yeah.
But he stopped.
Yeah.
I think that was one of my favorites. I've always listened to the Sam Harris one, which I've usually loved. The past year or so, not as much. I listen to Joseph Goldstein. He's a meditation. He's a Buddhist guy, and he does like an insight kind of a meditation one. A lot of, for me, podcasts, they've dovetailed incredibly well with airplanes, like with life on airplanes. It's just that I really think is at least in my case, that's why they've become so popular.
I think so. And I mean, it's an obvious thing. It's something you can listen to while you do something else, right? And so I think a lot of people sort of weave them into their daily lives, whether it's this is what I listen to at the gym. Some people listen on their commute to work, but you know, it's part of their routine in a way I think other things can't. A-Track had a really funny tweet, which I'm going to butcher now, but it was something about how his favorite thing about podcasts was that you don't ever really have to be listening to them.
Yeah, I kind of know. Yeah, I kind of know what he means. Well, I'm not into multitasking, and I've never been to a gym. And,
Okay.
but I guess it is my version of the commute, because I really listen. I'm on airplanes, so much of my life, and but that's funny what HX said, because it really is true. I have a few where I almost reached them on purpose to, like, when I'm kind of too tired to really concentrate, but not spaced out enough to sleep. And so it's just like words in the background.
Right. Which is, you mentioned meditation, and I have to assume that's at least a small part of your life or an interest of yours.
It's an interest, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that what you just said almost sounds like a meditation,
It is. It's kind of like a guy talking, but the end effect is very much like ambient music.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. More and more, and maybe this is just a consequence of electronic musicians of a certain generation growing up, but it seems more and more that more people I talk to, myself and others, peers, everyone's more concerned about kind of the mental aspect, the existential aspect of what we're doing. And I would even tie that into the podcast you're doing and the one we're doing right now. I feel like there's this new interest of sort of, why are we all doing this?
Well, I've always been a big reader, and it sounds silly, it's so obvious to say, but just learning, just that's what you're really trying to do all the time, is just learn. And podcasts, especially when you're traveling, that idea of just listening to someone explain something to you, or listening to a great conversation. It used to be much harder to find. It used to be something that was really, I know, did you ever hear of that movie, My Dinner with Andre?
Yeah.
So, like, I remember, there was a few very specific things in the old days where you would feel like you were able to eavesdrop on a really intelligent conversation, and now it's so much more common. I definitely think with musicians and DJs, there's something, I think, in the fact that for so many years, nothing was vocalized. Like, there was no explanation. There was no voice behind either the sets they were playing, and so I think for a lot of people, it's a chance to, well, basically just talk,
Yeah, and maybe
that's not how I feel about it, because I never had difficulty, I was finding ways to talk, but I think definitely for a lot of, there are people where it's an opportunity to maybe, like, explain some things they never had a chance to explain.
True, yeah, especially also for a broad genre that's not known for lyrics, right? And so much of the music is instrumental, and maybe it goes both ways. I mean, for me, if I think about it for myself, it absolutely gives me an opportunity to say things I couldn't say in a DJ format, but then maybe also for people who like what we do, it's another way to sort of connect with the artists who make the work that they like.
Yeah. Well, there was nobody ever heard so much. I also think too, just one other thing, which is I guess of the times, definitely the long format is something people really respond to. Definitely people, I think the opportunity, and it's also why people like to be guests on podcasts, the opportunity to really kind of expand on a thought or explain something properly, or, just set up a little bit more of your own context. Absolutely. I think is pretty appealing, because that's something that is, it's nice that it's not just a tiny little soundbite. And I think that's kind of what's really pushing podcasts forward right now.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And we'll move off podcasts in a second. But my one question, I was actually listening to yours this morning. I listened to the Annie Mac interview that you did. Well, I have two things. First, I want to ask you, in interviewing the artists that you've spoken to on your podcast, you've had people like Annie Mac, Carl Cox, Seth Troxler, a bunch of big names. Have you learned anything that changed your perspective? Has there been any particularly surprising moments from, people that you've known for years and had an image of?
Well, the reason I started the podcast was actually to learn, to learn from other people. And specifically, I walk around with all these questions all the time in my head, Not every period of your life is as many questions, but there's definitely periods where there's a lot of questions, and especially about career and making music. And, there's just...
Like questions about how other people are doing it, or if they're doing it the same way as you're doing it?
No, it just begins as a question about yourself, like, okay, what am I going to do with this? Or, oh God, how blank, And then, it's a short jump over to think with your peers, basically, how do you do this? Or how do you feel about this? All of it really is some form of, am I crazy? Or blank, So because I can't help it. I mean, that's how I see the world. I'm constantly seeing things where I think like is everyone else crazy? Or am I crazy?
Yes.
So then when you have a chance of, so then, especially if it's friends or people you respect, or you're starting off a place where you're not just going to dismiss what they say out of hand. So you're going to listen, and you're going to hopefully learn something about yourself. And so that's specifically with the people I've talked to. Did anything really like surprise me, or did I learn something? I mean, I guess what was coming up in a few different interviews, like the Annie one, I guess was this thing about people's relationship to fun. So I guess the short answer, I learned I was really like, I kind of lost the thread a little bit about just basically like shut up and have fun.
Right. Right.
Like, and so, but in that, I wasn't really surprised, because I don't necessarily think everyone goes through the gymnastics that I do in my head, I'm not sure that everyone does think about those things as much as I do, or
right.
I don't know,
Well, as somebody else who started a podcast to talk about this stuff, I think there are different levels of that for sure.
But definitely there's specific targets. I mean, usually what I look for in a guest is it's somebody where I have a specific angle that I want to figure something out. Mm-hmm. So like Carl Cox, for example, I mean, really it's like, I want to know basically how he's still so happy. That's really what it boils down to. I want to know, why he's just smiling and seems to be having a blast every time he's up there. That's it.
Yeah, that's fair. For yourself, do you feel like, have you always thought this way? Did you used to have more fun? Are you trying to figure out how to have fun again? Because I feel that way personally sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, well, in terms of specifically DJing, I used to have more fun. I mean, but I've had it comes and goes.
Yeah.
There's definitely a cycle.
Well, I remember...
I've also had a very long career. I mean, because you're not talking... Forget even career. You're talking about your youth versus your whatever it is. So, I started DJing when I was 18. And, your experience when you're... I mean, it's very different. You're a totally different person. And it's, in your teens and your 20s, I mean... And even your 30s, I mean, these are all very different experiences. You want different things, your ego is completely different phases. You and you crave and you need different things,
That's true.
But I think I had a lot more fun in certain areas.
Okay.
But it's still like, it kind of comes and goes,
Yeah. I mean, I asked specifically because when I knew I was coming to talk to you, I looked at your Twitter feed, and just last night you were complaining that you couldn't find any fun records to play.
Yeah. Well, that's
which is, I understand, is a somewhat separate issue, but
yeah. Well, the common ground is I have a bit of a strange relationship, I guess, with maybe fun's not the right word, maybe escape is a better word. It's one of my favorite words. I'm just not, I don't know, like I've never been a big drinker. I'm definitely not a hedonist, So that leads to some basic questions, because when you see other people that are, you ask why.
Right.
What is it about me? What is it about them? Sometimes those questions, I guess, are just moot points. Like maybe it's not worth pursuing, but especially in this environment, you're sometimes when you feel like a bit you want to know, The thing about the fun records is actually very specific. I haven't been doing much on Twitter lately, and I didn't really articulate that so well. But that's just for me a very specific musical thing where it's like, it just seems so hard now to find, for me, to find a record that I consider like a fun party record that isn't either a throwback or an embarrassment.
Yeah.
That's all.
No, I completely relate to that. And this actually leads me into something else I wanted to touch on, which is that I think we come from slightly different worlds. If I'm known for anything, it's definitely more on the EDM side of things. And EDM or bass music or whatever you want to call it has a similar issue right now in that I don't think there are a lot of fun records that aren't embarrassing or corny. There are lots of quote unquote cool records, which are, sort of more what I would call producer music, where, somebody's done something insane with sound design or somebody's made a crazy complicated song that's impressive to the people who understand how it was made. But it's interesting to me because one thing I always struggle with, and I wanted to ask you this too, is, why can't we all get along? Like, I feel like there's this dichotomy between highbrow and lowbrow in dance music.
I mean, for me, it's a total non-issue. I mean, my answer is, I like, in my experience, like, I get along with everybody.
Yeah.
In the sense of, I mean, style-wise and individual, you're like, everyone is just, how to put it? I mean, I just don't judge until I meet somebody, like in terms of it's not relevant to me.
Sure. Yeah. I guess for me,
style wise, I like how you put it all get along. I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think you'd have to be crazy not to recognize that so much of that stuff is relative, right? So, I was lucky. I was around at a time, like I caught the early 90s. Okay.
That's when you started DJing.
Yeah. But most importantly, that's when I discovered techno. I mean, I wasn't there for the first wave. I wasn't there for like 1988, 89, but I was there for kind of the first big North American wave, 92, 93. And because of that, you get like, early Love Parade, and I went to Europe early. But a lot of that's just luck. I mean, that's just, now I'm bringing this up because like you talk about, highbrow, lowbrow, whatever. So much of it is just your positioning. So like, I remember when I was really young, I didn't know so much about old Detroit records. I didn't know so much about old disco records. The records that I heard in the early 90s, if they sampled those records or made reference to those records, that was new to me. Guaranteed to somebody who was 3 or 4 years older than me at that time, those were cheesy records. Right. Now, I learned from an early point that right now, I get all kinds of, a lot of people would probably consider me I have old school, like a certain credibility or whatever, but I still know that to somebody, I loved records that were kiddie records, I always had a little bit of a soft spot. A lot of my friends were really against EDM. Like a lot of my friends really like routinely sought. I actually always had kind of a soft spot for it because I grew up kind of as a raver in the early 90s. And I always was kind of aware that like, as a kid in the early 90s, what drew me to rave culture was it was high impact, it was high energy, it was high octane, it was colorful and big and brash. And I think a lot of those things are similar to what happened later in EDM. So I don't know. I just never been a snob about music. I'm just not like that,
Yeah, well, that's nice. I mean, yeah, for me, it's.
I am a snob about other things. I mean, no, but I mean, the flip side of that is I also do believe, not everyone is equal when it comes to their taste, and some people are just whack.
Well, that's
totally the thing.
Fair.
So that's what I mean. Like I judge, it's an individual thing. I mean, there were people, but
I'll agree with that. I completely agree with that.
And there are people, but the other thing too, I think when you've been around a while and you've met a lot of people, I just like to give people the benefit of the doubt. A lot of the time people that have made it, people that have a career in music, I like to give them the benefit of the doubt that I'm a bit naive in that way, but I think, they're probably trying just like I am to make the best music they can. They're probably,
Well, I think what you said earlier about timing is really key too, right? Is sort of what was their entry point into electronic music? What was the first thing they heard? How much history do they know? How much history do they have? Because if you take all of that away, we're really all kind of trying to do the same thing, right? In theory, most of us were attracted to the music for one of a few broad categories, right? Whether it's an escape, whether it's fitting in, a place to fit in where you couldn't fit in before, whether it's the energy of the music, it's these broad categories.
Yeah.
And I think beyond that, a lot of it, I'm making this up as I say it, but I think a lot of it is sort of what you said about timing and your entry point and where you are geographically, what's going on in your scene. To me, it shares so much. Like, both techno music and EDM and a million other subgenres are concerned with tension and release.
I think where the dividing lines start to come up, and this is very wide, this is where people start to get separated, is in terms of how easy a path you want to walk, basically. So I think what happens is, people, it's like, we all know that things can be pretty easy. It's easy to make a good record. It's easy to kind of do a decent party, and it's easy to do a decent podcast. Like, more and more the world is like, it's quite easy. The bar has been lowered, It's pretty easy to get a little foothold in a little way and make things that are good. Past that point, things get a lot harder and a lot more interesting. And I think people's own tolerance, how quickly they accept that something's good enough versus how hard and how deep they dive to try to get better and better and better. That's, to me, where the lines start to get drawn, if that makes sense. So I think that's where I think there are differences within scenes, because some scenes, there's a culture, whether it's I don't use the word pretentious, but like some scenes, I think there's a culture of pushing a little harder, I guess, trying to dig a little deper. But really, it's a personal decision. And anyway, I'm just trying to say that, and that cuts through all scenes. I mean, there's people, but definitely now, 2019 or whatever we are, definitely this is a time of low ass quality in a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty universal, man.
Well, in a lot of areas, and it's just, podcasts are a good example. There's just, or books. It's just crazy what gets accepted, like in terms of like, oh, this is a book, or this is a and it's the same with tracks and with music, and it's, and that's, but I don't think that's, it's not really like scene specific. It's just, but I definitely think that's like, and in terms of friends or colleagues or people you respect, for me, that's what I usually end up, even if I'm not aware of it, that's subliminally, that's what you're really looking for. It's like, how deep are they going? How hard are they pushing to make something amazing?
Well, and I would say that does stand out more nowadays because everything's so super saturated, right? Whether we're talking about, millions of tracks to sift through, or everyone has a podcast, or, all of that kind of thing, which makes me think about what you were saying earlier about growing up, going raving in Montreal in the early 90s. I'm curious about, just what the scene there was like at the time, but also, do you think that, having less access and having a smaller scene at that time, did that elevate things? Was it, in the sense of like, things were printed to vinyl, which is expensive, and you had to go buy the vinyl from a physical store.
Yeah, all that stuff. Does
that elevate things?
Yes, 100%. All the stuff. Well, we now know. We can all see what's happened to the world, and whatever. I guess to simplify it, scarcity increases value. And increases experience.
That's funny you say that. Yeah,
I think that's pretty clear. Now, in my particular case, it's a little tricky because I also happen to be, 18 years old. Things that happen to you when you're that age tend, it can be pretty magical. I mean, you're at a very impressionable, your life's crazy, life is wild and you're impressionable and you care so much. I mean, I was fanatic about techno and the whole movement to a level that it's hard for me even to understand now.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fanatic, the kind of fanaticism that, like political. Like, I mean,
you were an extremist.
Yeah. I mean, it was all, and I was a true believer, but a believer in a, in a real, like, I was fully into it. It was all I cared about, But yeah, I mean, I think, it's hard to compare. I mean, that time, that was a very, very special time. It was like the newness of it. So you have the scarcity issue. It's
right.
Like what you said about, what it's like when you have to pay $15 for a record and you can only have 5 records. So you fall in love with them, etc.
Yeah.
The scarcity of the events, there's a million little details, just even things that we forget about. Like when people forget what it's like if you don't know who's DJing at a party. Forget you don't know set times. You don't even know who's there.
Right.
How does that change your perception? So there's a million little examples like that. But more than anything else is just the true cultural newness. That's what you never get again. Just the idea of, because that happens, I think it happened with punk, it happened with hip hop, happened with rock and roll.
Yeah.
There's, and those are very rare occurrences where it is just undeniably new. And there, I believe there's a difference. It's not relative. There's a case where I don't think it matters just what time you are. I think if you are really there when something is truly new, it's not the same as if it's just new to you later on. So
was raving new to Montreal in the early 90s?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I threw the first parties, but these are firsts that are hard for people to even understand now. We're talking about things as basic as the first time people saw a colored flyer. Everything had been black and white.
That's so
the
fucking
first time
crazy.
Parties with more than one room. The first time things had been open all night. The first time you'd find out locations at the last minute. The first time you'd have DJs coming in from other cities. All these things that now are just beyond regular, like they're not even worth talking about.
So when you say you threw the first party, I mean, let's dig into that. What was that party?
Well, okay, so Montreal, I didn't throw the first party. Montreal had like an existing club scene that was very strong. It was, I guess, a bit built on the New York scene. There was a very strong gay scene, and they had some warehouse parties. And there was a club scene with, and it was very much like, I guess, New York, like house music. Studio 50, not Studio 54, Paradise Garage.
Sure.
Like that influence. But then, no, I was the first one to throw a rave.
Okay.
We were the first, and I started with a few little ones, and then we did a really big one on, was it March 23rd, 1992, I guess? 92 or 93. It was called Solstice, and it was just a massive prototypical, big giant rave. And then, I did everything. I did book the DJs. I did loads of parties for years, for about 5 years.
What was the thought? Like, what made you want to start throwing the parties? Was it that
nobody else is doing it? I wanted a party.
And you wanted something different from what was available, different than the clubs?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, you think, it feels like I'm talking about a different lifetime, but you pick up little scraps of information. Obviously, there's no internet.
Yeah.
So forget all that. You're talking about, you'll see something in a magazine, you'll see something on a television show for 10 seconds, you'll get a compilation CD at a record store. You get these little tidbits of information, and I knew there was something called rave. And then by that time I would take trips to like New York. I'd been to some parties in New York. I've been to Limelight. I saw Jeff Mills play at Limelight. There used to be these big raves in Brooklyn called Storm Raves. So I had seen little things in Europe, and I just wanted it at home. And there was an entrepreneurial side to it. I was like, it was just, I saw it happening in other cities. I thought, I'm going to do it here.
Yeah. It sounds very, very raw and kind of just, from seeing it to doing it, not much in between.
No, and I actually think now, I mean, it's a quality that now I'm really proud of. I never really recognized it, but it's funny when I think back now. Now I'll have things on my lists, start the podcast or write a book.
Yeah.
And like some of these things, they'll exist on the lists for like years. And in my head, I'm like, okay, I need 6 months to do that.
Yeah,
I have to
build up so many steps.
And it's all garbage.
Right? Yeah.
And then when I think of myself, I'm like, I owned a huge nightclub. I owned probably the biggest or the second biggest nightclub in Montreal, in Canada. It was massive. It was one of the biggest in North America. And when I think about it now, the entire from decision to open a nightclub to opening a nightclub, the whole thing was probably like, I don't know, a few months. Probably like a few dozen hours. But it's a really
amazing.
But it's a very important. It's like that with making tracks too. I mean, it's a really important lesson in just. It's really just about like going for it,
Have you ever thought about where those qualities came from? What kind of a kid were you? Like even before DJing?
I think about it a little bit lately. I don't know why I've been thinking about it lately. As you get older, you kind of start to tell stories about yourself, and you're not even sure anymore if how accurate they are.
Isn't that weird? Yeah,
I guess I'm unpacking it a little lately. I mean, I was definitely confident. I did not lack in confidence.
Did that come from your parents or environment?
I guess so. I mean, I was a bit of a weird kid. I had a weird name.
Yeah.
I had long hair. Yeah, I had a weird... I grew up... I spent a lot of time in India. I saw these parties in India as well because my dad would DJ. Sorry, I left that out.
Yeah, no,
that's actually a big part of it.
Right.
I mean, I had a pretty... I definitely had a pretty alternative, in some ways, upbringing, and I was definitely very confident, and I knew, or I believed, for whatever it's worth. Yeah, I just thought I was special. I don't know, everyone does, and I definitely did not think anything was holding me back. But at the same time, also, I mean, some of the rave years, some of it was definitely childish. Like, I wasn't the cool kid in high school, and payback time, baby.
Right, yeah.
So there's definitely, there's definitely a little bit of that, a little bit of, just this is my thing now, and I'm going to be, I was very ambitious, really ambitious, the kind of ambition that, by the time I think I was only 20 or something. And by the age of 20, I owned a record store. I was definitely the biggest promoter probably in Canada. Yeah. I was about to open this giant nightclub, and I had like so much happening, and it was just, I was really a kid.
Yeah, and doing all of that so young. I mean, when I think to what I was doing when I was 20, I mean, I was fine, but it wasn't anything on that level. I have to think that seeing your dad DJing, was that a profession for him? No. It was kind of a hobby?
Yeah.
Yeah. But even just seeing him do it at all, I think has to plant that seed in a kid's mind that, there are other ways to do things. There are sort of weirder experiences out in the world.
Oh, yeah. Well, my parents were, I mean, I saw a lot of stuff when I was young that was pretty out there that definitely...
Like, whoa, what do you mean?
Well, I spent like half the year in Goa in India. I saw rave before it was rave, basically. I mean, I saw...
They were on that before the rest of the world?
Goa, I don't know.
Goa Trance.
Well, before it was Goa Trance, Goa was just a place.
Right.
It was the first Ibiza, it was probably the first place in the world. I mean, outside of what was happening, I guess, in New York and Chicago, I mean, some of the urban centers, as far as some like hedonist paradise, as far as the idea, which is now completely commonplace, like, hey, we're all going to go to this weird beach and take drugs and freak out. That was it. And that was happening as far back as the 70s. I mean, that's like, so I was a little kid and I saw all that. I never made any kind of connection. Like, if anything, I mean, I hate hippies, and I hate, and if anything, but I hate them because I understand them. I don't hate them. I hate them with a full understanding of who they really are. You know
too much
through experience. No, but I grew up seeing all that stuff. So if anything, I didn't want to be like that. I never wanted to be like some weird. It's probably why I'm not so into like Burning Man and all that stuff. Like that was never exotic to me.
Well, yeah, and you said you're not a hedonist.
Yeah, and that's probably why I'm not, because there was nothing exotic about it at all. If anything, I wanted to be the other way around. If anything, I saw all the adults acting like children, and it wasn't so impressive.
That's so interesting. I wonder, this is complete speculation, but I wonder if, that early ambition and all the parties and opening the club and all that was a way for you of saying, actually, we don't have to do it this way. I think this is a cooler way we could do it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think, it's really hard. The more actually now when I look back on my childhood and like my identity, I don't think there's really like a clear, it was a very atypical upbringing, and there's some currents running in that don't normally go together. So you had like that kind of hippie-ish Goa trance party scene, but then at the same time I was raised to like work really hard in school and quite straight in other ways. So there's all these things that I don't know. It's hard for me to parse exactly. I do know though, with the rave thing and those early years, I mean, it was as simple as children, when you're young, if you find something you're really into, and if you're lucky enough to have the opportunity to go for it, watch out. Because kids can be lethal, and that's what happened to me. It was just like, you have so much energy and you're so sharp and you're so unencumbered by like, I had no doubts.
Yeah.
And so when I found something I was madly in love with, so first I was generally in love with music, and then specifically really in love with techno and the movement, and identified with it. And then obviously, I took some of the things I had internalized in India, and, my parents, the good thing is I just saw that there was no rule book. That was the main thing. I mean, I didn't, I just saw from how my parents lived and my dad did that you can make your own way,
Yeah, do what you want.
Yeah. The only other thing too that's kind of hard from the perspective of today is it's strange to understand, but like in the old days, and then we should probably move on from the old days. But the other thing too is it's like, the idea that you could like make a lot of money DJing, that was not in anybody's head.
Right.
Like nobody was like, that wasn't until years later.
I mean, I was going to ask if in any of this, owning the club, owning a record store, throwing all these parties, I mean, were you making money?
Well, I was making money because I was so young.
Yeah.
So yes, it was big money at the time.
Sure.
And I was making money because I was, I had all these like business side of it. But what I mean is but it was never the motivation at all. And the idea, I guess I'm saying is, it's like, I don't know if it's because I was so young or because culturally there was no one to look up to. There was nobody like, oh, that guy's driving a nice car, he's a DJ. Like, no, that was impossible.
Right.
Years later, you started to hear little stories like, Todd Terry has a Porsche or some shit like that. But what I mean is, for whatever reason, the calculations, the words like career, or that was never, ever, ever in the mix. I don't think that stuff started for another 5, 6, 7 years or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the point for me that I took out of what you just said is that, even the reasons people would start to be interested in this thing are different, right?
Now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that there's definitely, that's the whole world now is just so much more numbers based.
Yeah.
Money, numbers, data, like things are so much more quantifiable.
Yeah.
And verifiable.
I mean, capitalism is doing real well right now.
Yeah. Well, you see, there's a, whatever it is, it's 25 years. It's a long time.
Yeah.
And a lot has happened. So it's, things are very different now.
Well, and so another thing that happened along this sort of timeline that we laid out is not too long after you did the record store and the club, you also started Turbo, the label, right? Yeah. And when was that? Like 98, right? Something like that?
Yeah, 98.
Because you just did the 20-year anniversary. Yeah. 2 questions. One, why at that time did you feel like this is the next step, the label should come now? And 2, in all of these different ventures that you had, you were also DJing yourself, you were an artist yourself. Did any of it excite you more than any others? Were you focused in one area?
Well, I don't think I was really an artist yet, in the sense, I still don't know if I'm an artist, but 100% the business stuff was a means to an end. I was cheating, basically. I was creating an environment where I could maybe exist as an artist if I got to one. So it was like, nobody's booking you. Throw your own party, book yourself, basically.
Yes.
That's the basics of it. So the idea to start a record label, I mean, I was really interested in graphic design. I loved making things. That was my favorite thing. I wasn't making music yet, but I loved... It's a very 90s thing, but like making stickers.
Yeah.
Just these little silly things that seemed like, so wow, it's got my name on it. Like those things. And with the record label, it was really an opportunity two things, to get closer to actual artists, to have some, I wanted to kind of be in that club a little where I would have something to offer and talk to just to the artists, not about the business or the club and also to do a lot of, graphic design and product design and making things, physical things. But 100% by that time, by the late 90s, I was very, I got a very clear idea in my head that I had kind of dirtied my hands a little too much with the commerce and the business stuff.
Interesting.
And I made a very clear decision, almost like too clear a decision, to really turn away from that. And that was when I decided, like, okay, you really have to prioritize DJing. And I mean, look, secretly, I just wanted to be an artist. I just wanted to make my own music. And then I had to kind of like, I don't know why I was always so quite conservative in a way.
Yeah, that you couldn't just out of the gates say, I'm an artist. You kind of had to, get in from different sides.
Yeah. And also, you got to be careful what, if you're successful at something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you, and especially if it's business. So, if it's one thing, if you open a club and it flops, okay, I'm going to go be an artist now. If you do things and they do well, it's a little harder to tell yourself, it's hard to move on sometimes.
Yeah, of course. And I think what you mentioned about the business side of things bleeding over, that's something I talk about all the time on this show, is when what you do for fun becomes your job, right?
Exactly.
And how do you keep that same creative energy and that excitement when at the end of the day, you're looking at a page full of numbers? And,
Well, it's always, I think that the wrestling between the business and the creative, I think that's just always going to be there. It's probably always been similar, and it's still like that. And we all have our own version of it, Oh,
yeah. I mean, you think about even like Renaissance painters, they had their patrons, and I'm sure there's some kind of Renaissance version of selling out that they were accused of at the time. I do think you're right that's.
I've been lucky. I mean, the one thing that I've never had a boss.
Yeah.
And I've never had a patron.
That's great.
And I've never had to. Well, it's great, and it's not. I mean, it's super fortunate. Yes, it's great. It's very spoiled, but at the same time, it means it's always just down to you. Like it's you have to be the one to move yourself from one area to another. You can't blame it on circumstance. You got So
well, and here's another question for you. Do you think that if you ever had a patron at some point, or someone who is really bankrolling, would you have been able to do something that you feel like you couldn't have done on your own?
No.
Well, that's good.
I don't think so. Certainly not in that sense. I think it would have, no. I mean, there was a lot of years before I started working with my current manager in, I think 2002 or 2003 or something like that. Before that, I was like there were years where I was like drowned out by there was a lot of administrative, like a lot of just day to day. I had a record store too.
Right.
There was a lot of like day to day. Once he came into my life, and then since then there's been more people like that just to free you up. That was a big thing. But
yeah, having a team is helpful.
But I can't blame. I've really, if anything, it would have been nice at some point. I wonder what would have happened at some point if someone would have just said, "Hey, you're not allowed to you're not allowed to do any of these other projects. You have to focus 100% on making music." I wonder what would have happened.
maybe that's a good way to talk about sort of when you started to make the transition from, jack of all trades to, being seen as sort of the front man yourself, which is early 2000s, somewhere around there. It was Sunglasses at Night. That was sort of the big first track, right?
Yeah, that was definitely my like breakthrough. That was a classic breakthrough moment, if ever there was one. Yeah. Like it ticks all the boxes of breakthrough for a career,
Well, because, that was it was on the radio, it was on MTV, right?
It was a really big record in Europe.
It was
a really, really big, I don't think it was, not so much in North America, but it was a huge record in Germany. It's a very big record in England, not quite, very big in France, and just, continental Europe, Eastern Europe, it was a big deal.
What was that experience like for you of having that first hit and then sort of having people identify you with the sound of that hit?
It was great.
Really?
Yeah, it was. The whole thing was like a fairy tale. It was so nice. The thing is, in your own way, we all have our version of feeling like we're in the wilderness. Like somehow we're not being appreciated, or somehow we're not where we should be. Most of it's garbage thought. It's not productive. But we all have some sense. Sometimes we feel underrated, sometimes we feel overrated, whatever. But specifically at that time in my life, I definitely felt underappreciated creatively. Yeah. Whether, I don't know, maybe I was deluded. But the point is, the whole experience was just so great because I was just so happy, and I felt like, okay, I'm getting my chance,
Yeah.
What was great about it was I was getting my chance for something. Like my ticket in wasn't bullshit. My ticket in was a really great experience where I just made a cool record with a friend of mine. Yeah. We did it with no label. We did it with nothing was contrived. We had no strategy. We weren't trying to be anything. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's also like, it's just a really nice lesson because you're like, okay, Yeah. So the whole thing was really naive and fun and a really nice experience, and it lasted for a long time.
Yeah, well, and what you said, I think, goes to the heart of what DJing is, and what I love so much about what we do is that, you were saying the feeling underappreciated or just feeling sort of disconnected. And to me, that's what DJing at its heart is just sort of trying to communicate with people through this medium. And at least personally, I've always walked around, even as a kid, just being like, am I crazy, or is this as cool as I think it is? And then when you finally get that feedback that, oh no, if you present it in this way.
Oh, you mean about a record?
About a record, about kind of anything. Like for me, DJing is a way to connect with people and to sort of get validation that I'm not alone and that my thoughts aren't as crazy as they feel like.
Something for you to do at a party.
Yes.
A place for you to stand. Something to do with your hands.
That's so funny. That's true too, because I'm pretty awkward at a party without anything to do.
I definitely remember the first time I saw a DJ actually. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I was always I was never socially awkward, but I think I was a bit shy though. I was a bit shy. Like I was shy with girls and I was shy with so I think, I was joking about it's something to do at the party, but there's an important distinction. I wanted to do something. Mm-hmm. I think that's the difference.
Not just be at the party.
Exactly. I didn't just want to be, it wasn't enough just to be a participant. I think that idea of doing something, contributing to it, and also getting some attention for it. Like there was something about that that appealed to me. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I guess I could sort of trace that through that transition to being an artist and to really being seen as I keep coming back to the frontman term, but for me, the first record of yours that I bought was the Hot in Here record, which I really loved, and I play it all the time at all of those parties. I would play that like every set. And moving through your career, there were lots of those records that it just didn't sound like anybody else. And I think really filled a niche of, it's actually really funny now that I'm talking about it. I think they filled that niche of a fun record.
That's why I'm looking so hard. Right? Why, if I could do it, why? That's why I'm so aggravated. What strikes me now, I don't think back on my records much. I don't. But the thing with Hot in Here, what I'm amazed by now, I just thought about it like, I don't know, the last few years. It's like, there again is an idea where it's like, it seems so basic now, but again, where I didn't take any time to think about it. I was just like, the Nelly song was still basically on the radio.
Right, yeah.
Like, I was like, I love this song. I'm going to learn all the words and I'm going to sing it and do my own version.
Right.
And I was like, okay, let's go, Yeah, it was a good one.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It worked because there was something in the music that it was that vibe that you weren't trying to make sort of a corny cover.
No.
And
the thing is, the execution of things is, the idea is one thing, and loads of people have these ideas, and I have a million ideas every day. And it's the execution, the timing that makes the difference, and it's really in the details and the line between something. I've always, I've never liked it. I don't care. People. For me, I think sometimes people think something's ironic or they think I'm poking fun, but I'm not. I never am, and I also don't think that if you poke fun or you're ironic, I don't think your records can really succeed. They can exist in a little kind of jokey way, but they're not going to really connect with people. But it's in, the line between a record like that being a joke or being a good record is very subtle, and it's...
Yeah. Well, and I think there's nothing wrong with a little wink.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, I think whether there's a little wink or not, I don't think ends up relevant because the track has to work.
Right.
Underneath.
Yes.
So if the track works and there's a very subtle wink, okay, cool. If the track doesn't work and the same wink is there, it's a joke track.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And for me, the way I look at a record like that, and I could be totally wrong with how you look at it, but what I love and what I try to do with my own music, my own DJing is, I love doing this so much. It means more to me than pretty much anything else I've found in the world in my life. But I also recognize that it's very absurd at the same time. And
why is it more absurd than something else?
Well, I guess I think there's a societal perception that it's more absurd than something else, than being a banker or something like that.
Yeah.
But, and if you just look at, there's a person on stage playing records and then 10,000 people are jumping up and down. It's beautiful, but it's also, there's something, I don't know what it is, just the idea of it. There's something about it that's kind of fun to me, or like absurd.
I sometimes feel it's absurd. I think it depends on where you're at in your head. Like, I sometimes feel the absurdity just in the distance between where I'm at sometimes and where the crowd are at. So like, if there are 10,000 people and they're all ready to go nuts, and I'm like, sometimes I'm just like, whoa, why am I here? Just because I'm in such a different headspace. But I don't know. I think as far as an overall, path, and I don't know, I think we're all doing our best, like whatever keeps you busy. And I don't think one's really more absurd than the other.
You're right about that. I guess for me, but
it depends, like you said, also it's your upbringing, it's the environment,
right.
If everyone in your family was groomed to be a doctor and all of a sudden you're making beats.
Yeah. Well, and since you challenged me to explain it, the more I think about it, I think what it is that sometimes while I'm doing it, there's something in the back of my head that's like, I'm getting away with it. I figured out a way. It's a great feeling. Yeah.
I have thought one thing that's absurd. Sometimes I've thought that if you've spent 25 years like in studio and DJing and parties, sometimes I think and then you're still kind of, I'll be in studio and I'll, spend a few hours on a kick drum or something. That I've thought sometimes like, hey, that's crazy.
Right.
Like you've heard, millions of kick drums. Like, and you are still at this, like you're still in a room, a grown man with another man debating the hi-hat. Like that's
kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's a bit, but you know what it is? I think also that's just like,
but I also love that. I want to be clear.
But you know what also? I think it's also just, it's craftsmanship. It's
execution, right?
And it's like, there used to be guys that made shoes there still are, but you know what I mean? That's also just craft. You know, I think.
Well, and one thing about your craft that I think ties into this, you mentioned the importance of having this simple idea and just putting it out there without sort of doing it to death in your head beforehand. And that's something I see as a through line with all of your work. Like, I think if we're talking about the big songs, I think about a song like Bugatti. And that, again, I watched the video for that this morning, which
It's a good video.
Oh my God. I had forgotten how good of a video
it's a really good video.
But the song itself, it's just one line of a lyric. It doesn't even happen that many times in the song. The elements are very spare in the whole thing, but everything is sort of perfectly placed. Everything has it. There's like a beautiful simplicity to a lot of your music.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's intentional, if that's something you think about.
Well, that's definitely intentional. And Bugatti's one of the better examples of that, where like, I think it's just the minimal information necessary to still work. There's just nothing in there that isn't necessary.
Well, and what I liked about it, there's something about that one line, like it's sort of a meaningless phrase, but also, I think if somebody's mind picks it up and you hear it repeated a couple times, it lets your brain sort of make a story behind it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, when there's not a lot happening, you leave space for the listener, to fill in. And I think I'm changing. There's definitely, it's not even a phase. It's most of my records. There's a bit of a template there, especially where basically it's like, I'm going for a groove that you can kind of listen to endlessly on repeat.
Yeah.
Not a lot happening. Usually the hardest part of that is either the bass line or the riff, because those are the ones usually that get annoying,
Yeah.
And then a very pared down vocal. It's like one line from a poem, and really just like the simplest configuration possible, but that still has some twist, something that makes it a little bit different, whatever. And a lot of the time those things happen pretty like it's pretty instinctual. It's just like, okay, boom, we're good to go. Like the feeling's there, whatever. Yeah, that really, I don't know, that formula has worked well for me. I think I could see maybe in the future trying to do something a little bit more, maybe where I don't go so much on instinct and maybe try to, but who knows, I think. It's weird with dance music also. The truth is with dance music, this is specific to dance music. I don't think it's the same for everything else. But like, I really believe I would put a wager. I don't know about all the modern stuff so much, but like almost every incredible dance record, I'm sure it was done in a couple hours.
Yes.
I'm just sure of it. Definitely all the old house classics. A lot of the time it's like they didn't even, and same with limitations on the equipment. It's like they're basic. These things are there. It's a mood. It's a moment that's captured, and that's why it works so well. In the club or whatever.
Well, yeah, I'm obsessed with creativity, and that's something I think about all the time, because you're absolutely right. All the best records are made in a couple hours without overthinking it too much. But then there's that part of execution that we talked about earlier, where you sort of have to not overthink anything, but also overthink everything at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, also, making music is theirs with the details. Something I don't think I ever said, but so Bugatti was done really quickly as a demo. I did it with Yori Hilkonen, the same guy I did Sunglasses at Night with. We did it in Montreal very quickly. Really quick. It was like a couple hours. I played it that night or a couple of nights later at a party in Montreal. I loved it. I thought it was like the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
No one else really reacted so much. People thought, okay, it's cool, whatever, but there wasn't. And I remember even management, no one really cared about that much. But a little detail it's worth mentioning is I got Matthew Deere, who I was working on some other music, Audion. We were doing some other stuff together, and I asked him if he could mix the record. And he didn't add anything, or maybe we added the little hi-hat that comes at the end. Anyway, he just mixed it. And it added this little like magic dust. This happens obviously a lot of the time with mixing, but there's a case where like, there's so much of it's like, I don't want to say it's accidental, but there's a lot of good luck required, like these little details, because otherwise, I mean, that record really sounds complete. There's something about it that sounds like, okay, this is like a perfect little package. And if it doesn't get that last, it's like a glaze or whatever. If it doesn't get that last stage, maybe it doesn't even get to that point.
Well, and that makes me think about collaboration, which is something I think you've always been really good with. And the idea of you can have this perfect idea. Like take Bugatti, you had this idea, you made it, you thought, this is really cool. But then at a certain point, you realized that, or at least you wanted to sort of have somebody else just reinterpret it just a little bit in a way that you might not have yourself. And that's...
or I couldn't,
Right.
For me, collaboration is central to everything. Really everything good I've ever done on so many levels. I really enjoy it. I really love working with friends. In a way, it also becomes your social life. You know, like all the people I work with, it's really like, we're in the trenches together. I mean, the trenches, whatever. I mean, just two guys, but I mean, we're really, it's like, that's a bit the idea of the podcast too, because I have, you're in studio with someone for 3 or 4 days, just endless conversations about everything, politics and music and life and sounds. So it's been the biggest part of it's been everything. It's been central to everything good I've done musically, as far as the projects I did. I mean, there's very few things I did entirely on my own. And I also think too, I'm good at it. There's no question. I'm good at working with other people.
Right.
And but also it's a bit of a secret weapon in terms of longevity, because again, it's a bit of a cheat, because you're like, okay, new relationship. I got to prove myself. I have to reinvent a little. And it's a very healthy way to keep it all moving,
I would agree. Yeah. It humbles you. You can kind of get reinvigorated yourself with somebody else's energy. And again, as a solo artist, it's not all on your shoulders for once, right?
Yeah. I mean, I still feel like it's on my shoulders, just in the sense that the dynamics I have with people, the ideas are usually coming from me. Yeah. So like if I don't have anything, we're not getting a track done. Yeah. So I still feel like pressure in that respect, but
it's a healthy pressure.
Yeah,
pressure
and it's fun, and I really can't imagine it any other way.
How are you with ego?
Can't you tell? I'm an absolute dream.
Yeah, you seem great, but I guess I mean in terms of collaboration, are you precious with your ideas? If somebody says no, I don't like that, or if they want to change it in a way,
no, I don't care about that. Yeah, I'm not very sensitive. I mean, I think again, you do it for so many years, and you develop I think any artist, you got to have a pretty big ego to start with.
Yes.
I mean, you have to.
Because, just to say, hey, look at me.
Yeah, to say, hey, look at me. And also, fundamentally, most people are in some way or other telling you, hey, shut up. Like, who do you think you are?
That's great.
To not actually shut up, there has to be a pretty strong ego there somewhere to persevere, But at the same time, and this is an interesting paradox. A lot of the time, I'm not saying I'm one of these yet, but a lot of the time I think the really, really accomplished artists and the real heavy hitters, the Quincy Jones, and I think they've really found a way to actually really dissolve their ego. Like they really know there's a giant ego, but it's just knowing when to really defer to other people, knowing when to really just park it, and how to work with others and take criticism and everything.
Yeah.
For me, I was lucky. I mean, again, like when I was younger, I was really, you want credit. I mean, that's what it
Sure.
boils down to. When you're young, you want credit. It's not, or at least that's how I was. It was not enough to just, it was not the process.
Right.
Like that was not enough.
Yeah.
Like if I would have done something and somehow gotten ripped off, or if someone else's name was on it, I would have freaked. I mean, that would have been a really bad scene. But I was lucky it never really happened. And then unless you're some kind of psycho, unless you're like a monster, you get sated, your ego slowly gets, and that's what happened to me. So it's like, I'm not still looking for those highs.
Right.
I got it. I'm looking for maybe things in other areas, but
Did you get those highs off of the touring lifestyle once you started hitting the road really seriously, getting out in front of people? Was that something you took to, something you really enjoyed?
Okay, I was to go back to, I was like kind of like a local star,
right?
When I was really young. So in terms of the as far as that like very raw, basic kind of high school ego, I got a lot of that fulfilled really young.
Yeah.
The big thing for me was just people thinking I was making good records. That was like, and not just saying it, but like other people playing it. I mean, that was a giant box ticked, feeling validation from other musicians, people that I liked.
That's big for me too.
That's the biggest.
Yeah.
And then obviously, I mean, look, there's all these, if you're lucky and you get these, traveling the world, making some money, feeling like you've done things on your own terms. All those things systematically were really, really big.
Yeah.
And felt really good.
Well, I mean, these days, what's we keep talking about this idea of fun. What's the most fun for you now? Is it the touring and the shows? Is it making the music and working with friends? Is it something else completely? Like, what gets you excited?
I mean, the feeling of making a great track, I mean, being in studio and coming out with something you actually think is good or great is still, in terms of a singular moment, it's still probably the biggest high. I mean, it gives me I get so happy and so relieved, and because, I put a lot of pressure on myself, I guess, and it's difficult. I actually find it very difficult. There were years where I didn't find it difficult. There were years where I was like, we're going to bang something out. Let's make a killer acid house track. Right. And we do it. And for whatever reason, there's a lot of reasons, but I find it in the last, let's say 3-4 years, to make something that I consider a little bit different and that still excites me and that I'm proud of is hard. And so when you have those moments, you really feel really good. You're like dancing in the studio, and that feeling is still incredible. A really good show is also really good. It's different though. The thing is, shows, I learned a long time ago, it's like shows, you probably know, it's like shows, there's a weird cycle to it. You play one show, it's horrible. Oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Yeah. My records all suck. You do another show, it's okay, and you're like, yeah, cool, I'm going to do 10 more. Then you do one, it's fantastic, and I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Everything's incredible. There's you don't even remember what, and that, as I wish I could control my emotions a little better, but I've realized that's just kind of the cycle. Yeah. So like, even when there's an amazing show now, I kind of like, it makes me feel really good for a couple of days, but it's not like...
Yeah. One thing you just made me think of when you were talking about being in the studio and making a great song that, you just made it and no one's heard it yet. I think there's something really fun and exciting about the potential.
Oh, yeah.
And imagining what it could be before it's actually something.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling so well. It's like, that's when I know something's good, is like my brain just starts going. I'm coming up, I can see the video and the song title and the album cover, and it's going to lead to this and this, like all those that whole process of daydreaming and fantasizing, and the potential, because that's excitement.
Yeah.
That is excitement. That's really what it's all about. And that has nothing to do with, that's not like sitting down with your manager and planning tours. That's not this bullshit we all do of like, what the next level. No. It's not it's not artificial or strategic. It's just like, and it's so beautiful because a lot of time it's such a delicate thing because you're like, shit, 2 hours ago this didn't exist.
Yeah.
Which is a nice feeling. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an insane.
You know, it's quite, that's, and I also think too, I mean, I've now at this stage of my career, I'm friends with so many people in all kinds of, you know, super rich people or super successful people or straight doctors, lawyer, whatever it is. And I'm convinced that the feeling, like the real creative high of making something, I think it's higher than most people know. Like, yes. I don't think it's something that a lot of people really experience. And it's like, it's worth a lot. It
is. And it's, at least for me, it's something I'm always chasing because it doesn't happen very often.
No. It's you're chasing it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about DJing, I rag on DJing a little bit. And I mean, the thing is for me, I think DJing became something a bit, I don't know. I'm not wild about the people it's attracted or the whole thing's a little bit now, you know, like culturally, it's not the most interesting, but what I will say is though, is when it's good, you know, and you're really, and there's that energy and it's like, you know, we all know those moments when it's undeniably really good and you're on, again, that's also something most people just never feel. And it's really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right, man. And those, I do think you're right that that feeling, that's maybe what I feel the luckiest about being in this lifestyle is that I think you're right. It's not a feeling that everyone knows. And
that's why like, you know, I know so many people like straight people, you know, super successful. That's why they're always still, even now, like interested in what you do, because you can tell that, like, you know, also most people, I mean, you could be even a successful writer, you could be a Hollywood producer, whatever it is. Very few people have that kind of contact with their audience.
That's a good point.
You know, very few things have that direct, like there's no, I think comedians have it.
Yeah.
You know, where there's just that direct contact. It's like, man, that just worked. And you go back to your hotel room, you're like, yes.
DJing is so much like stand-up comedy. I think about that all the time.
Yeah, I remember for years I was really into that idea. And yes, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah. I want to do just a quick speed round of I got a couple notes on my phone.
I know how speed round goes, and I will honor...
Speed round rules apply. First of all, the Pusha T remix of Bugatti.
Yeah.
How did that come about? What's your impression, memory of that?
I loved it. I love the final result. I really loved it. And I have a son who's really into hip hop, and it's the closest I ever got to some actual cred.
To being cool.
Yeah. I mean, he
he
didn't really give it up because I think to him, Pusha T is like, you know, an old man or whatever, but I got a little something. How it happened was, okay. Oh, you're from Chicago.
Yeah.
Vic Mensa.
Oh yeah.
He's from Chicago, right?
Yes.
So Vic Mensa was on a BBC show. It's completely random. He was on one of those BBC shows where it was a radio show where I guess they play something and they ask people, it's like a panel, like, what do you think of this record?
Yeah.
Random, right? Like the original Bugatti was a record on that. I don't know how that happened. And he was a guest. And they played a little bit of it, and he was like, he's like, I fuck with this. Like, he was really into it.
Yeah.
Through management or whatever, I heard about that, and I was like, yes. Because I love hip hop, but I was very into the idea that this guy can detect the funk or the you know, he can feel that there's like, okay, he felt the groove.
You connected, yeah.
Yeah, because there was not much happening. Anyway, because of that, we were like, okay, because I was always like, maybe there's like a hip hop angle here. And then inspired by that, at the label, they're like, okay, why don't we get a little short list, accelerate it anyway. And I suggested Pusha T. He was one of the guys because I was a big Clips fan.
Me too.
Great record.
Oh man.
He delivered the verse, and I was so happy too, because a lot of the time you get a bad verse, or especially if it's a guy leaving his regular zone, you can get some garbage, and it was great. And everything about Bugatti was like a perfect little everything. You never get a good video like that.
Right.
I mean, videos are so shit always. The video was perfect. The Pusha T thing was great. that was not really speed round. But.
No, that's fine. That was all I wanted to hear. So Turbo Records, you've worked with a lot of amazing artists. The more people, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but I've been surprised with all the guests I've had on how many times your name has come up from people saying that you somehow influenced them early on or had a hand in their early careers. I wanted to just throw a few names at you
Sure.
and see what comes to your mind. I had Chromeo on the show.
Oh, cool.
And almost instantly, the podcast was derailed by Dave trying to find old Montreal rave flyers and talking about your record store and the early connection that you guys shared. So what do you remember? What do you think about Chromeo?
It's funny. I just wrote liner notes for their reissuing She's in Control, the album, and I just wrote. He just asked me to write the liner notes. Well, I mean, it's a very Montreal story. Like I knew his brother. I knew Alain. I booked Alain to play at my nightclub when he was like 13 or 14. I think I gave him his first show.
Early A-Track, yeah.
Yeah, and that's how I met Dave. We got to be friends. And we were never like, we got to be pretty good friends. And I met P. I think P was working as an accountant for a hip-hop record store. Anyway, it was just a Montreal story. And we had the idea like to put together this little supergroup. Like we all were quite ambitious about it. At the time, it was by far my biggest investment in something. Like I wrote them a real check when none of us really had
right.
real checks to write, Anyway, and
first you had to get a checkbook. Yeah.
It was like a real advance. It was like my Clive Davis moment.
Right.
They had a very, very clear vision of what they wanted to do, and they just did it. And that's how Dave is. He's very, very. He's a very driven, very smart guy.
Very intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a very clever guy. And I'm really happy with everything about Chromeo. And it was great for Turbo, too.
Yeah, huge was that the first kind of big thing
I think
Turbo
that was our
put
first,
out?
That was our first, it was definitely our first band.
Right.
It was our first, it was our first for, leaving just the 12-inch world and trying to kind of cultivate a real artist label relationship and stuff. Yeah, that was probably our first big one.
What about Boys Noise?
Alex, he's a great friend. We were just in studio together about a month ago in Berlin. Fantastic. He did a record on Gigolo, which was DJ Hell's label, which was the label that signed Sunglasses at Night. And I got that record. I think I reached out to him. He also must have been really young at the time. And we struck up a friendship. Boys Noise is an interesting guy. I mean, he was one of the first of the new breed, as a DJ, really to take it to he's a fantastic DJ.
He really is.
And Alex is amazing. He's an incredible producer. He's, I think even in a way he's underrated. I mean, he really can do it all. Anyway, I think he was a big pioneer in bringing that heavy sound and super high energy, kind of a variant on techno, especially bringing it to the States and just bringing it to a wider market.
Yeah, making it accessible too. There was something about
he does it in just in an accessible way. And he just does it really well. He's just great. Anyway, he did a record a long time ago on Turbo. We're frequent collaborators. We've done a bunch of records together, and he's a great guy.
Another European, Gesaffelstein.
Mike's my favorite. He's my diamond in the I have a real soft spot for him on a bunch of levels. Yeah, I just love his music. I just love his music, and we all have our personal tastes, and that is really right up my alley.
Well, and you want to talk about a clear vision.
Yes, that too. And I just love, for me, that's the holy grail for me, which is it's got the power, it's got the personality, it's techno foundation, but not in any way boring and him as a person and as an artist, he's just, I don't think people necessarily realize how true of an artist he is in an era where they're really, really rare. I don't know anybody, and this is from day one. It's not like I don't know anybody in the dance music space that I see as much as, true art in the romantic sense of what an art, like all the artists I grew up thinking about. He's very smart and he's amazing at what he does. And I love him to death. Great. And that was huge for Turbo. That was a really That was a really, really big signing. I think he signed with us because I had done a record called London's Burning, which was like an old kind of semi-industrial record. And I know he always liked that. And I had signed The Hacker, and he was a big fan of The Hacker and Friends of The Hacker. The funny thing with Turbo and with all labels is, it's interesting. It's very interesting to hear why artists sign with you, because it becomes like a puzzle. You get this one, and then because of that, you get this one, and if you're lucky enough, we made a list one day of everyone that had ever done a remix or a record on Turbo, and it's mind blowing. I mean, it's just it's hard to find people that haven't. Right. In any category. I mean, we've had, I think Diplo did a record, Afrojack did a record, Steve Aoki did a record.
Which I love. And that was something I wanted to touch on with actually this next one I'm going to throw at you, is there was this time period, the blog house years, if you want to call it that, where I think in the late 2000s, sort of everyone was in the same place for a little bit.
Yeah.
And
it's funny, actually.
I don't know exactly why that happened, but one record that defines that era for me is Raven by Proxy.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and huge record.
Oh, man. I mean, it defined, maybe not single-handedly, but it easily in the 5 records that define that era.
Definitely. No, you're 100% right. And I like how you put it, that we were all thrown together there for a few years.
I don't know why, but for a second there.
Well, I think, I have a funny story about that. I'll never forget. Steve Aoki asked me to play a show with him in LA. This is just an example of how we were all kind of, and I remember I was playing with him in LA the same night that LCD Sound System and Too Many DJs, or LCD Sound System was doing their closing show in Madison Square Garden. So I remember I was like on the phone with Too Many DJs. They were LCD. I was with Aoki. Like it was all
right.
And I could have been at either one. I think everyone got thrown together there a lot to do just with the energy, because that was a period where kind of like Too Many DJs, myself, Errol Alkan, Boys Noise, like a lot of us were playing pretty high energy stuff.
Yeah.
And then there was like Crookers and Bloody Beetroots. And then at the same time, there was, I guess, the beginning of EDM, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, it must have, I think, well, anyway, you said it perfectly, which is Raven is the perfect example of that. It was, Raven is a fantastic record. I mean, there's really not a lot like that. And Proxy was a ridiculously talented guy. And yeah, that's probably have to be my second favorite if I have to pick favorites on Turbo.
It's a good one, man.
Well, again, he was from the middle of nowhere in Russia, coming at things with just such a unique and sophisticated and crazy sound. To me, he was a little bit like, he's almost like another Skrillex, where just the first time nobody sounded like him.
Right.
Nobody sounded like him before or really after. And but he had the production chops to actually make it sound big enough that, so it wasn't just, these are crazy ideas. It was like, it just had this impact to it.
Back to the execution.
Yeah. I think, for that period, I think Justice and Proxy were the ones that stood out to me.
Yeah. I was in Australia touring a couple years ago, and I don't know if you know the DJ What So Not.
I do.
He was doing, randomly at the same time I was there, he was doing this throwback blog house night, sort of a secret set at the bar he used to play at when he was a kid. And he played, all the classics, Proxy, Raven being one of them. And when he played it, I'll never forget, it's just one of those things that's burned into my mind. Everybody, I don't even think he told them to do this, but everybody...
They sit down?
Yeah, everybody sat down, but then they sung the synth line.
Oh, yeah.
Like he didn't even have to play the song anymore. They were just singing.
Yeah, that record that used to happen to me at festivals. I remember at Melt Festival in Germany. I mean, 10,000 people just sat down and then jumped up. And I don't remember seeing that before that record. That record was like a stadium, like a football record. It was like I really feel that Proxy was underrated. I mean, the record got credit, no doubt. I mean, and props from all the people, but especially when you consider what happened after.
Yeah.
If you consider what happened to a lot of, if you made a record like that now, like if you made a record that was that big for that many people now, you'd be like you'd be a superstar.
Absolutely. Although I think it goes to timing too, because now there are lots of people trying to make records like that. You know what I mean? Whereas at the time, I don't know that there were so many people with that intention.
Yeah, I think there's always been a lot of people trying to make the record that destroys the party.
Yeah. I mean,
I think for him also, but I think also for him, I think it's also just identity. You know, I think had he been American,
sure,
or had he been from LA
sure,
at that time,
yeah,
you know, there's a lot of timing in terms of, you know, he was a
marketing and
kid
branding
from Russia
the business
with
side.
visa problems.
Yeah. All right, last one for the speed round. More modern, more recent. Charlotte DeWitt.
Charlotte. Yeah, Charlotte has blown up. She's doing very, very well. I have to say, I mean, Charlotte, I was not particularly involved in A&Ring her records. Like I wasn't really, I mean, I was very into the records and I saw a lot of potential, but that wasn't like, I can't claim that much credit. That has to go to mainly to Francis, who works at Turbo. I mean, Charlotte, I just saw potential, really. I just saw like this could really be big, you know? And it is big, you know?
Oh yeah, no, she's great.
The interesting, one thing about Charlotte, it's interesting that I had never, I've told this story to a few people. So it's hard. I think Charlotte hits, it's techno. And it's pure techno, really. And it's, you know, it's got the drama, and techno is so big right now. But I think also Charlotte, I didn't realize this at the time. I wish I could claim to be a genius. But I think Charlotte's got even something a little bit bigger than just that. It's almost like, I almost see it a little bit like a goth, not goth, but like basically in terms of markets, right? There's all these markets.
Yeah.
Like I'll give you an example. When EDM started to blow up, I remember thinking like, okay, all those kids used to listen to Limp Bizkit,
yes,
or Korn,
yes,
like they got to go somewhere,
yeah,
right? And that's kind of how those things work, you know. Like
I was one of those kids.
Okay, so there you go. You know, like so. I think also when I see Charlotte perform sometimes in that techno, I think there's even a lot of like just how she moves and how she looks and how she presents her music. There's people that are drawn to that as a personality. It's more than just techno.
Yeah,
it's like. It's almost like, I don't know who, I don't know.
Maybe that she's sort of created a space for people who didn't feel like they necessarily had a space in that music before.
Well, yeah. And I think it also, people look for things in their performers. People have needs that they want addressed. You know, sometimes you want a bit of drama. Sometimes you want someone that's a disaster. You want the drug addict. We want all these different personalities. And I think Charlotte's a good example of like, there's a drama to her, like the way she moves and with the music she's playing, there's a theatricality that answers something and gives people something, and it's a big thing. It's not a small thing. It's something that is missing from a lot of other. They're not getting it when I play. Right. That's for sure. Let me put it to you that way, you know.
Sure, yeah.
It's different, you know. I always put a lot of that energy into the records I made and the videos and the way and the live shows. I think I come from an era was a little. I had a bit more of a. I had split in my head between DJ and artist, and I don't think that divide exists much anymore, or they've moved on.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Well, I mean, in this day and age, I mean, you have to be a producer in order to be a DJ, almost.
You think?
Well,
I think actually, I would say the other way around. I think there's been a big resurgence in DJs that are not producers. You look at
we're starting to see it for sure.
I mean, there's been a lot. I think the past 5 years, there's a lot of a bit more kind of old school DJs who are not necessarily making big records.
It's true. Yeah, this maybe actually goes all the way back to what we started talking about, which was sort of the differences between the scenes. Because at least for big top EDM, you kind of
what do you call it? Big top?
Big top,
like the circus,
like the circus. Yeah.
I mean, I have to say
it's a producer's game. But then there's in one of my favorite DJs right now is Eris Drew.
Oh yeah,
and you know
she's great.
She's amazing.
You know, it's funny about Eris Drew. I have to say, I don't know how old she is.
I don't either,
and I don't know exact history, but I think I have a feeling there's a real raver in there because I see the track lists and I hear the sounds. There's a lot of like a lot of 90s breakbeat and a lot of the psychedelia, and it's not resuscitated psychedelia. It's not like, do you know what I mean? It's not like this. It seems to be, it's pretty legit. And I have a feeling, anyway, it's just a very good, legit crafted sound.
Yeah, I really want to get her on this show. I want to talk to her more.
Yeah, I follow her on Instagram.
Yeah, nice.
I also think it's so, I love like the love affair with her and, is it Octa?
Yeah.
I think it's so, I don't know. It's sweet. You just don't hear, I don't know. You just certainly don't, you don't hear many DJs talk like that about.
I agree.
Like, I think it's really, I like it.
Yeah, no, I like it too. There's something really just, it's charming. It just makes me happy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually that side of, and that's become a lot stronger in the past few years, like that side of dance music or whatever really reminds me of the early 90s. That it reminds me a lot more. It's like, there's a lot of like care and attention to detail. They care about the shows. It's kind of like the opposite of business techno. You know,
Right.
it's not like, you don't get the sense they're business travelers.
Right.
Just going through the motions. It's really like, it's nice and it's refreshing.
Yeah, and maybe to wrap all of this up, that care, that attention to detail is something I think you have in spades with all of your work. There's all, these little details that are clearly conscious decisions, that sort of thing. Does that come into play with you when we're talking about social media and when you're talking about, how much of myself am I presenting? How private do I want to keep myself? How much do I want to engage versus, how much of a planned out thing do I want to give people?
It's a big question, and it's one that I think after many years, I just kind of throw my hands up in the air. I don't even know the answer.
Yeah.
What I do know is I know that personally, like, I haven't found the right zone for me. Like, I know a bit like a social media presence or whatever it's called, like a consistent, it just doesn't make me feel very good.
Yeah.
Like it creates for me like kind of anxiety. Like I just I don't find it. I guess what I'm saying is in my idea of an ideal world, I wouldn't have to do it at all. So it's like a luxury not to. Now, but that's also just because I don't know. It's just how I am. It just kind of stresses me out a little.
Oh, of course.
But I do love it at times. I have spikes. I'll do a bunch of posts and I'll check and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm killing it. And I'm like, oh, it's all happening. And then for a month, I can't pick up. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But the real issue, and it is a real thing, and you mentioned, you caught it, the issue of mystery versus sharing or revealing is a big question for me. And it's one that I really go back and forth on. And I think in the end, I think it's just the times have changed, I guess basically the simplest way to put it is I grew up very much believing in the mystery. I always thought that was my instinct, is that, and that I'm a private person too, and I kind of liked that idea. The people that I looked up to, the princes of the world, they just were not going to post a photo of their breakfast.
Right.
I mean, it's just a completely different world.
They were unknowable in a way, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we'll never know how it would have been but I believe that's my first choice. That's what I think that the saving up, the withholding, I think builds up tension and I think not having when you have the drip, drip, drip every day, I think it takes away from some critical mass of pressure that is needed to build up to make something incredible. That's how I feel
like
for
that.
myself. But I also am not blind to what's happening, that the world is a different place now, and that there's now people that have a mastery and a comfort level with all of it. And it just works incredibly well. And that's what connects with people. So I don't think, would Young Thug be better or more mysterious if he wasn't doing all that pose? No, not really. He's killing it.
Right.
I love him. I love
Right.
everything about him.
Me too.
And he pulls it off, and he does it in a new way, So I don't know. But for myself, I lean towards the mystery.
Yeah.
I think again, it's like a little bit harder. I think for me, it's easy to just throw out a lot of not meaningless. That's not the right word. It's easy. And I do it like everyone does it. I do it sometimes. But what I don't like about it is there's a lack of rigor. There's a lack of rigorous thinking. It's epitomized. The best example is stories on Instagram. Like I did it tonight. There were some birds outside the window. I did a thing.
I saw those birds. That was crazy.
Yeah, okay. So it was crazy. And they're birds. And I wrote some little thing. But the truth is that, 15 years ago, I would have written in my journal that I saw the birds. And I actually think, like, just personal, there's a better chance of that turning into something if I don't share it.
Yeah.
Or if I don't share it right away. That's just how it is for me.
Well, it keeps it pure, right? Because the second you share something, then other people's reaction to it colors how you see it.
Yeah,
right?
but I'm not talking about that. I'm even talking if you just send it out and never look again.
Yeah.
I just mean that it's more just, again, it's what I said. It's about the difference between the easy or the hard road. It's that you have an impulse, right? You see the birds and you have an impulse. The impulse is, oh, that's cool. That's interesting. And then I'm going to capture it. And then where you go after that, is it the quick share or is it something else? And the point is that how hard you look and how deep you go into what that impulse really was is the separation. I think that's all the different levels of art. I think that's, because you take it all away, and that's where you get like, just the highest level of poetry where it's just like the birds made you think of these 6 words, and for 200 years, we're still talking about those 6 words about birds,
Yeah.
Anyway, that could all be a romantic view of things, but it's definitely how I see things.
Well, I love that. I think that's a perfect way to sort of encapsulate everything we've been talking about. And boy, do I love that 6-word bird poem that we're both so familiar with.
I'll get working on that later on.
All right. So last question. While I was listening to your podcast earlier today, it made me think, when I do this podcast, one thing I've figured out about myself is that a lot of what I'm asking people are things I wish people would ask to me.
Yeah.
and so I want to give you that opportunity because you have some questions that you always ask on your podcast, which is called The Last Party on Earth. You're asking your guests sort of what would their party be like if they had one final party.
It's quite sadistic.
Yeah.
I ask questions. I ask these things like to choose the final record, like things that I could never answer.
Of course. And I'm not going to make you pick specific records, but if you had one last party, one final party, and then it was all done, what would it be like? What are your impressions of it? It doesn't have to be that specific.
Okay. If I were never to DJ again, that's something that I've done basically every week since I'm for 25 years. The only thing I can say is one thing I really like. I mean, there's one specific feeling, and it's hard to put into words, but I guess it's just like, there's just a moment where you're locked in a mix. For me, that's what it is, I mean, obviously playing an incredible track at the right time and everyone goes crazy is amazing. But I was going to say, like, just you're really locked in a mix and it's like kind of bubbling along and you're able to kind of stay in it. Yeah, exactly. You like stay in it and you just know it's dope, and everybody's kind of on the same wavelength. But I don't know. That's almost back to that potential thing, right? Because the thing hasn't happened yet, but you can kind of see what's happening and see where it's going. Yeah, there's something also nice about it's a bit different now with CDJs. Everything's so locked in, but it used to be really cool where it was kind of fragile. You're like this could fall apart. Yeah. This could really fall apart at any minute. Yeah, that moment is fun too. I don't know. I don't really think. I mean, I think also too, I'm guilty of this. Came up in a few of the podcasts when I talked to. I think I'm guilty sometimes of the past years. You start to think a lot, and you're thinking of your productions and your music. And sometimes it is really best to just return to the basics of just, making sure everybody has an amazing time. Like everyone's just going crazy and you're having fun. And it's back to fun, baby. It is back to fun. Well, I would want my last party. I definitely would need to have fun. Yeah. I definitely don't want to leave that party with any question marks. There you go. That one has to be obviously fun. Yeah. And that's probably the most important thing to leave it on, man. I've had fun. I hope you had fun. I have. I had a great time. I'm glad, man. Thanks so much for doing this. Thank you. All right. Peace.
right, that's the show. Shout out to Tiga. So much fun to sit down with you, man. What a treat. I hope for everybody out there listening, you enjoyed that as much as I did. Don't forget, Tiga's podcast, The Last Party on Earth. The first season is out right now. The second season is coming out in 2020. There's going to be a link to that, as well as all of his tour dates, his music. Everything is going to be in the link in the description of this episode. My name is Willy Joy. You can always reach out to me as well, at Willy Joy or at Back to Back Pod at all social media. Or if you want to hit me up directly, if you're feeling shy, if you want to keep it private, that's all good too. backtobackpod@gmail.com is the email address. That's it for this week. I'm done talking. I'm done talking for the week. God, I talked so much this week. I'm done. My brain is done. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a good one. I'm bailing out of this one fast. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.